Hi, I'm composer Caleb, and welcome to my studio. Today, I'd love to share with you a little bit about a short film that I got to score recently for the 48-hour film project here in Cleveland, Ohio. Our team, Partial Refund, made a great film in 48 hours, and I worked on the score in less than that, in about 5 hours. And we were really grateful to have won some awards, including Best Original Score. So I'd love to break down that project file for you today and show you a little bit of behind the magic of our short film, Gorlock. Come on, let's check out the studio.
All right, welcome to the Logic project file for the Gorlock score. So I think the way that we're gonna take a look at this is we're gonna go cue by cue. I'm gonna explain a little bit of the thought process behind the decisions that I made in scoring and hitting certain cue points, and some tips for efficiency along the way. And yeah, let's just jump into it, starting with the opening cue. So I was fortunate to be working on this near Halloween, so it was good to get in that headspace. There's definitely some inspiration I'm pulling from classic musical tropes in this sort of dark fantasy genre, including, but not limited to, Harry Potter. Maybe a little bit of like the Munsters, a little bit of that classic 70s musical horror tropes. And this being a comedy too, it's fun to kind of play with certain melodic structures to do a little bit of that Mickey Mousing, if you will, but in a very dark, mysterious, laughable way. So let's head back and I'll break this down track by track. So the idea for this came to me on Sunday morning when the edit had finished the night before. We were all up late working on that, and I decided to go to bed at a reasonable time on Saturday night instead of working through the night on this score. I just know that my brain works better when I'm writing and working on more brain-intensive things during the daylight hours, and so I opted to get up early. And I actually didn't get up super early. I started this at about 8 a.m. and worked through until about 1 p.m. But the first thing that I did was come up with this melody that I got inspired as I woke up. Thankfully, it kind of came to me at that moment. And I remember getting dressed and getting ready, and I was working out the structure of it in my head already. I could hear sort of this sweeping melody line, kind of Harry Potter-esque, but then feeling like I wanted that intense chordal structure underneath it to have these big hits that kind of can give also the intensity of a murder mystery, which this also is. So that led to this melody here, which I quickly went and jotted down on my keyboard. So it's mainly represented through the brass. So that's the first part of it. And the second part gets picked up over here. So I've got a layering here of a legato brass patch and a staccato brass patch. And that's just to give a little extra attack. So these are both coming from the Spitfire Albion, the original Albion brass mid patch. This is one of my go-tos. And then as we move down further, we get into the string section. And one thing I want to point out about this project, and I think one of the efficiency tips that I gave myself the grace for and the ability to do, was to not worry too much about perfectionism and going more for complete abstraction, in the sense of the way that a pencil sketch can sort of abstractly define a portrait or an animal or whatever it might be. I wanted to sort of take that same philosophy of like, I want this to be clear and understandable that this is a heavily orchestral score, that has, you know, a soaring strings and brass section, but knowing that I've only got a few hours to do this, there would be a few corners that would be cut, but I wanted to make sure that in the sketch, I'm sketching the most important aspects of what I'm trying to mimic, which would be a fully produced, a fully orchestrated score. So that's a bit of the trickery that's going on. It's a little bit simpler than it sounds, and that was sort of the goal. So here is the string shorts. They're adding that tension and bringing us into this first theme. So again, following very closely to the melody in the way that it rises and falls. And it's also accompanied with a low patch as well. Just a nice spiccato bass. I love that. And I believe this is also, oh, actually, no, this is coming from the Addio, if I'm saying that right, Adagietto library. I just like this for a little bit more of an aggressive sound. One of my favorite strings libraries. And I think actually that this is also Adagietto. I'm probably saying that wrong. I gotta forgive my Canadian pronunciations. So just an ensemble spiccato patch for quickly sketching this down. So moving on down, the next thing we have is this trem. Just a low trem to build in some tension, and that's layered with this twirl patch down here. Twirl and Spooky Castle. Those are the two things that I defined early on in my palette when I was searching for patches in Omnisphere. I knew I wanted to have some atmospherics that I could layer over top of things to give it a little bit of that magical flair. And so these are a couple patches that I found that I've used throughout the entire score through all the cues. So this twirl patch is really versatile. I believe the higher octaves that you play, the faster the twirl goes. So that was really useful for adding tension later on. And Spooky Castle. I mean, I think that sounds like a Spooky Castle. And all together with the orchestral build elements. I like it. So it can't be a Halloween castle score without some harpsichord, am I right? Now this is very messy, almost intentionally messy to give a little bit of that quirkiness. Some of these harmonies are probably very not right, but in context, it works. And so it also adds a lot of tension here in this section. This is sort of like the B section of this opening cue. So the strings and the harpsichord are kind of doing a little call and response thing. To me, this strings idea was very Thomas Newman inspired, something that he often will do for building dramatic tension cues. I just love that forward momentum of the string section kind of going back and forth between a couple different chords. Let's see what else we have interesting here. I laid down a couple synth patches from my Arturia MicroFreak, which sits beside me. And I also printed some echo fix delay when I recorded them at the same time. So that's what these are. Let's have a listen. So just something to layer over top of the brass melody, just to add a doubling. And down below here is another double, but a special one. This is a Theremin patch that I played on the Arturia MicroFreak as well. I think it does a pretty passable Theremin impression. And then moving on, this is where we start to look at a few of the different beats that are happening in this opening scene that I'm trying to hit. So we'll analyze that a little bit here. So this is one of the first major beats, is that reveal of the blood crystal. And also just the intensification of this argument I wanted to highlight with that Omnisphere patch, the twirl. So those things all are working together. And there's another patch here that I'm using sort of in the same idea of that sort of tension builder, that crescendo, if you will, and this is this low swells patch. So it almost ends in a little bit of a boom, but then I double that with another low booms patch. And that hits right at the moment after it falls silence. It has to be one of us. And then the Celeste is hitting a little bit of a Mickey Mouse kind of effect when we see Gorlock is this mysterious character, this little chord answering, or asking us a question, rather. And then we have our Gorlock title, which is just a really simple bass, a synth bass. This is coming from Omnisphere. I believe this is just a simple sine Moog synth bass layered with the twirl. And that we have it. That was our first cue. So moving on, next scene. So next scene, we get into the interrogation of Chris to his strange party of friends and wizards and warlocks and gorlocks. And so this is where I started to have some fun with a Juno 106 that I had on loan from a friend. And right here, that's kind of the bed of this next cue. All right, let's listen. So this cue has got a little bit more space in it, which I'm giving room intentionally for the more intense dialogue that's happening, exposition of the scene. And I felt like the Juno really gives that sort of like Stranger Things-esque intensity of like, we're trying to solve this mystery. Somebody just got blood crystalled. What's going on? I felt like it worked really well for that. Also printing the echo fix at the same time of recording the Juno. And this is kind of the next cue. So when we reference Nat, our caricature artist who's channeling spirits, I wanted to introduce a little bit of that. There's something spooky going on here. There's something mystical. And so the Celeste is such a magical instrument used so much by John Williams in Harry Potter and so many other magical tropes that I wanted to use it here to sort of foreshadow that with Nat's character. And so that leads us through the second half of this cue. We have the Theremin coming in with that little counter melody. There's a pizzicato string. Again, that classic comedy Mickey Mousing. And then this is sort of the Gorlock theme, if you will, the sort of preamble to him using his powers, and that's communicated through the low string trim and the spooky castle. And that's kind of what I defined early on, is that I wanted to just find my palette really quickly so that I could have something that sounded like one cohesive piece. And the other thing that was really important to me is that I wanted to have multiple cues. Even though this is a short film of only a few minutes long, and it's mostly set in one scene for the most part, I wanted there to be some breathing room. I wanted there to be some space. I didn't want it to be overly scored. Also, knowing that sound effects would take up a lot of the space for the special effects shots. So then, moving on, this is kind of an extension of the same cue. Just leading into the comedy with the harpsichord and gorlok, pizzicato strings underneath. Really simple. And there we're bringing back that theme that we introduced earlier. And that leads us on to our next cue. And that's this intensifying cue, which is sort of the turning point, if you will, where Chris has his moment of self-sacrifice. And the coolest part about this section was using the Juno again, but then using the pitch of the Juno to sort of dictate the rest of the instruments. I'll show you what I mean. So yeah, it's pretty intense. And it started with the Juno. Let's have a listen. Again, it's that same sort of Stranger Things patch. We have a faster tempo though for this cue, which gives us that extra anxiety. And you'll hear right there the pitch bend. And that was something that I was doing manually while recording, just kind of going down half step by half step. And then bending it all the way up, layering that up with our other traditional Gorlock theme elements, building towards his magical powers. I'm really happy with how that turned out. As another layer to that, I used an Omnisphere patch just to give some extra darkness, extra grit to the Juno. A little bit of an extra forward push. And together, let's see what else we've got going on here. We've introduced a little bit of percussion elements with this metal track. So this is just a collection of metal hits from the Spitfire Albion library. There's not a lot of percussion in this score overall. It's okay. I think there's a lot of rhythmic elements that sort of are very percussive in and of themselves. And then we're sort of bringing back this dark theme, which, big surprise, foreshadowing, it was Remy's theme. That sort of dark, ominous twirl was foreshadowing to the real monster all along. Classic tubular bell, giving you that graveyard, churchyard sort of vibe. Very spooky. And then I intentionally didn't add a lot of music here for this climactic moment where these wizards have their battle, because I knew that sound effects would be so heavy and very intense. So we knew that going in, and so I wanted to leave a lot of space to let sound effects just completely take over in that moment. Then the next bit is just a little bit of a comedic relief for revisiting our poor soul who got killed by the blood crystal, talking to Gorlock. So just a little lullaby. We changed to 3/4 time, dropped the tempo down, and that sounds like this. A little bit of shadowing with the theremin there of the themes that we established earlier. And then it's just the repetition of the original cue, sort of the main theme for Gorlock, done a couple times here. And this one I embellished a little bit more. We've got timpani. Maybe we had timpani in the first one, I just didn't show it. But the one thing that's different here is I copied over the brass MIDI information to a strings. This is not strings, short, low. This is one of the corners you cut, is naming your tracks when you're only got 5 hours to write a score. This is actually an Adagiato Grandiose Legato Violins patch from 8Dio. So this has a very John Williams-esque vibrato in it, which I really love. And so I let the strings come in for the first time with the melody here to give a nice big orchestral ending feel. And then pass the melody around a little bit, bringing it back to the brass, adding an extra layer here for the second time through, which you'll hear, just to give it the most full version of this theme before we end it. Let's take a listen. And there you have it. Those are all of the cues from Gorlock. What a fun project. Oh, I just had so much fun with this. For those that are curious, let's just take a look at the mix. It's not very intense. It was pretty quick, honestly, but there might be a couple things that we can find and point out. So I've got everything coming into this music bus here, coming into the Manly Massive Passive plugin first for some broad stroke equalization. Then I've got another instance of channel EQ where I'm just needing to do a little extra pointed EQ. And finally, Teletronics LA2A, just to provide some overall compression to make things sound cohesive. Other than that, there's not a ton going on. I do have a couple special reverbs happening. I've got a chroma reverb that's on a bus for the concert hall. And then I've got a Valhalla Supermassive instance, which you can hear, especially on things like the Celeste, to give that sort of super spacey vibe. I just absolutely love Supermassive. I tend to use it too much on everything, but it's just so good. And a couple other things that are going on here. On the Juno patch, I'm using a little bit of the Chroma Glow for a little bit of grit and warmth. But other than that, as you can see, it's pretty sparse, just the basics of leveling. We've got a little bit of automation throughout, doing some rough mixing in the different sections to make things come out at different times. Overall, that's about all there is to it.
Well, thanks for joining me today for this behind-the-scenes look at how the Gorlock score was made. If you want to check out the full short film, you can do so in the link that I put down below. Got any questions about things that you saw or anything else related to composing or music production? Drop them in the comment section below. I'd love to have a conversation with you. If you want more updates on what I'm working on, I'd encourage you to check out composercaleb.com. That's my website. You can go to my blog, and I've got a newsletter there for some email updates as well. Or I'd always appreciate if you subscribe here. I'm hoping to make more videos like this. So thanks again for your time. Thanks for listening. See you next time.